The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Bartholomew. I'm the Senior Corporate Communications Analyst for Xtero, and I welcome you to today's webcast, Collaborative E-Discovery, Driving Defensibility Through Transparency Inside and Outside the Corporation. We'll get started in just a moment. First, a few quick reminders. All the lines have been muted to reduce background noise. We do hope you take advantage of asking questions using the chat feature. It's located in your control panel. If we are unable to get to all of your questions, our speakers will do their best to answer them after the event. This webcast is being recorded and will be posted to the Xtero website. A copy of the slides, along with some additional resources, will also be available for download at the conclusion of the presentation. This webcast is being brought to you by Xtero, the pioneer and leading provider of workflow-driven e-discovery software. The Xtero Fusion platform delivers a 360-degree view into the critical data and workflows required for defensibly and cost-effectively managing all phases of e-discovery, from identification, legal hold, and early case assessment to collection, processing, analysis, review, and production. Speaking today will be Adam Wells. Adam is Vice President of Business Development and E-Discovery Services at Terrace, nationally ranked as one of the top 20 e-discovery service providers by industry researcher Sosha Gelman. He provides clients with strategic direction and best practice guidance on e-discovery and information governance, striving to deliver a repeatable, defensible process to clients that ensures cost containment and risk mitigation while adhering to the FRCP. Adam has nearly 10 years of experience in the e-discovery and litigation support field. Prior to joining Terrace, he served as the lead e-discovery project manager for a large national law firm where he devised and implemented e-discovery plans for clients, as well as crafted firm-wide e-discovery guidelines and counseled attorneys on those procedures. Joining Adam will be Brian Phillip. Brian is Vice President of Discovery Solutions at Lightspeed, a national litigation support company providing expert database design, project management, legal coding, e-discovery, and data collection services to law firms and corporations. Brian oversees Lightspeed's entire hosting operation, including project management, review methodology development, and training of support and marketing staff. He's also the driving force behind the strategy and development of Lightspeed's e-discovery platform. Prior to joining Lightspeed, Brian worked for Merrill Lynch, where he developed mortgage products that combined investment with mortgage financing. Also on the presentation will be Joe Ockrey. Joe is Xtero's e-discovery solutions consultant. He serves as the primary interface between the company's product development team and marketing and sales departments. Joe has nearly 20 years of legal experience and e-discovery expertise at large law firms and major corporations. His background includes work as a paralegal, litigation support manager, and e-discovery project manager. And finally, moderating today's webcast is Mike Hamilton. Mike is Senior E-Discovery Analyst for Xtero. He is co-editor of the E-Discovery Beat blog, a one-stop educational resource for news and information about electronic discovery. He speaks and writes on a wide range of e-discovery topics, including his latest published article on e-discovery and U.S. privacy laws. Prior to his time at Xtero, Mike worked within 2 in-house legal departments at Fortune 500 corporations. He holds a law degree from the University of Oregon, where he focused on business law. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike, and he'll get us started.
Thanks, Andrew. And as Andrew said, I will be today's moderator. E-discovery is a multifaceted and time-consuming course of events comprising multiple stages in a variety of teams inside and outside the corporation. To help ensure e-discovery is managed correctly and defensively, internal legal teams must have transparency and the ability to easily collaborate with all the moving parts in e-discovery. To accomplish this hefty task, e-discovery must be treated as a process. But usually, even if e-discovery is treated as a process, this process is riddled with gaps and inefficiencies, preventing legal teams from having the immediate and quick access to case information needed to investigate and evaluate outstanding risk. Within this webcast, our panelists and I will first set the stage for why and what makes e-discovery the chaotic process that it is, and the current legal standards that must be accounted for when addressing e-discovery. But the bulk of our discussions today will be providing the best practices, or as you could say, the building blocks to account for when modifying, defining, creating a unified process. The key word here being unified. Having a complete and unified e-discovery process across all stages of e-discovery will not only be cost effective, but will help ensure that your e-discovery process is defensible in court. Then lastly, we will highlight how technology can be leveraged to manage and create avenues between teams for visibility throughout e-discovery and the proactive access needed to make case-defining decisions sooner in the litigation lifecycle. Brian, for you, at a more granular level, what makes e-discovery such a chaotic process?
Well, the number one reason is that most IT departments are structured in a manner not cohesive with e-discovery. Accessing all their data points to isolate the potential responsive data is challenging, to say the least. The questions that arise is the data on the network clearly and logically located? Is the data from the custodians of interest on their PCs accessible and current? Is there an archiving solution? Has the stated retention policy, if there is one, been adhered to? Is the data on movable mobile devices in the cloud? Are all the custodian data sources mapped or even known? And if they are they even searchable? I mean, these are the challenges. So what the corporations have to have is, are they assessing corporate, and this is what they always want to try to figure out, are they assessing corporate involvement in a government investigation? Or they want to find out, is there vulnerability that they might have to some lawsuit that's pending, or simply they want to look at some pertinent information for some sort of internal audit. Well, when these issues arise, again, litigation, investigation, or audit, to the power of the involved parties, they're going to be likely the corporate GC, the outside counsel, and or inside counsel, as I mentioned, and IT, prevail over what is best for the corporation. Issues come up all the time where they might make the retention policy 3 months just because they don't want to have to worry about litigation, but it's extremely detrimental to the flow of the business. This happens all the time. So, what we really want to have is a blend of common sense, financial sense, and legal sense, specific to the rules and regulatory concerns. That's where Adam will jump in.
And Brian, really with the amendments to the federal rules that took place in 2006, those have been mirrored now in many states. The most recent of note being Florida, whose rules were recently unveiled with much fanfare. So, I think to your point, with two standards, and frankly, really that's a misnomer, because you have the federal standards on one hand, which, by the way, are interpreted differently in different jurisdictions, of course, and on the other hand, a hodgepodge of state standards. When you have this happen, the chaotic nature of e-discovery is amplified. So part of what we're going to talk about today, process and technology accelerators, right? Well, chaos is a great accelerator too, just usually in the wrong direction. So having to comply with many different standards and local rules governing e-discovery really just further underscores the need for a unified, transparent, well-executed strategy, one that's flexible enough to deal with various jurisdictional nuances. And we'll talk about this later in the broadcast, but being prepared for e-discovery cases at both the state and federal level can have added benefit in the areas of compliance and risk management as well. You can repurpose a lot of your process and technology to extend outward from the legal space into the business and technology sectors of your company as well. So I think one of the main questions, how can we make sense of jurisdictional chaos, right? There are certain defensibility standards currently in vogue in federal and state jurisdictions, obviously. But let me say briefly that defensibility standards are really more about the process, okay? About process documentation and transparency, more than they are about, a bright line ruling in one court or another. And that's obviously true when it comes to the three issues you see before you now: reasonableness, spoliation, and proportionality. Everyone wants to talk about cases or rulings or findings that help define reasonableness. I would argue that we simply haven't gotten there yet. Reasonableness is truly a floating signifier. And so this goes back to the e-discovery team's duty to understand the jurisdiction that will be hearing the case. And by the way, it's not just an attorney's responsibility, it's everyone's. The attorney, the paralegal, the lit support professional, the consultants. And why is that? Well, that's because reasonableness, for instance, in Judge Rosenthal's court, say, is likely not the same as reasonableness in Judge Schindler's court. It's argued on a case-by-case basis, issue-by-issue basis, and it's based in part on the cost and the ease of performing certain activities. right? So a unified platform with technology enhancements and accelerators can really reduce the cost and increase the ease for conducting investigations and other e-discovery type activities. But, where does that leave you? I think when talking about spoliation and proportionality, really and reasonableness, one does well to point to the Pippins v. KPMG matter. I'm sure it's fairly well known, so I'm not going to rehash too many of the particulars here, other than to say that KPMG, sort of hung their hat on the proportionality arguments, right, but ended up undercutting their burden argument in the end. And I think a number of commentators have warned that this particular case is an illustration of the judiciary placing too much emphasis on preservation, but I think it's really an illustration of the perils of not being proactive enough in your approach.
Thanks, Adam. Now that we've sort of set the stage of what the problem is surrounding e-discovery and why we really should care, let's move on and identify some best practices to utilize when trying to tame the chaos which surrounds e-discovery. A theme that Adam briefly touched on was the importance of treating e-discovery as a unified process. Adam, can you expand on this concept of having a unified e-discovery process and why it's so important?
Yeah, sure, Mike. Let's start with one of our favorite graphics. I think we all love the EDRM. And while it's useful as a construct, I think it forces a linear structure on the entire process, really encouraging us to think of e-discovery as just a set of disconnected pockets that are tied together by certain processes and technologies. And it all seems to flow in one direction, left to right. Well, e-discovery really, truly, and the practice of e-discovery is a continual cycle of activity. And I think the best practitioners are thinking about ways to shift the EDRM so that it is in better alignment, really, with an organization's business goals as well as their IT goals. So really the true building blocks for successful e-discovery, they don't center on solely having the proper tools to move from one phase to another, though obviously that's incredibly important. I would argue that the true building blocks focus on process itself rather than just the tool alone. So improving the process through enhanced collaboration, communication, transparency right between all parties, IT, inside counsel, outside counsel, and the various stakeholders that sort of commingle there. I think that's absolutely the underpinning for successful e-discovery practices. And one of the things that we have to do is kind of take the EDRM as it is and look for ways to improve it, and I think we're starting to do that. And so one of the central questions I find myself asking is, how can we bring process improvement to bear on, let's start with the identification phase of e-discovery. One of the ways to improve it, I think, would be to stop thinking of identification as a phase, really, and start thinking of it as the central governing force encircling all e-discovery activities. As we know, ESI is doubling every 2 years, right? It's doubling. And the number of different data sources and types is growing exponentially. 90% of all records created are now electronic. We can expect that number to increase significantly in the next several years. Enterprise data growth, for instance, is projected to be roughly 650% over the next 5 years. I mean, these are staggering numbers. And if that doesn't tell you that your organization needs an effective strategy for data identification, for information governance, right? Not going to be the first time you hear me say those words, then I'm not sure what will, right? So for me, identification, and really I think it's becoming more so for the industry as a whole, is where e-discovery truly begins. As I mentioned earlier, the linear aspect of the EDRM, does somewhat of a disservice to folks because it's easy to get caught up in that movement from one point to the next. But when it comes to information governance, that's an ongoing, constant, cyclical set of activities, and frankly, it has sort of much broader implications on an organization than just e-discovery alone. As we're all fond of saying, e-discovery is just one piece of the governance, risk, and compliance pie. So I think it behooves organizations, whether large or small, to really truly start at the beginning. Most companies don't. They begin the e-discovery process at the preservation phase, after a fairly perfunctory identification phase. But identification is much more than just sussing out which data sources might come into play for a particular e-discovery matter. It truly is knowing where data is located, knowing its value, and knowing these things even prior to litigation or investigation arising. It's knowing who owns that data, what value it brings to the business, what risk it may bring to the business. What risk is there involved in retaining that data, both from a legal and just a business perspective. Again, identification, it tends to envelop e-discovery in its totality. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but as the RAND report sort of confirms, I think what we were probably all thinking, review is a little more than 70% the cost of discovery, of e-discovery. So I think implicated in that is the fact that because most organizations don't understand the scope of the data they have, they end up over-preserving, over-collecting, and truly that just balloons the amount of data to be processed and subsequently reviewed. So, right, the big question is, how do you go about implementing an information governance plan? Again, start at the beginning. Construct a data map. Employ a hybrid model, right, where you interview employees responsible for data systems, interview employees who work within those data systems. What are their common data storage practices, right? And you can accelerate and enhance this plan, these interviews with technology. Use technology to help build and maintain the map. Use technology to standardize the process for locating data. That's a big one. And this will obviously help your organization in arguing the defensibility of your e-discovery strategy, right? Because this will all be documented. You will have a plan in place, and that's incredibly important. And I think it will help an organization's business practices overall as well. So, in a good identification plan, right? It not only identifies data subject to a litigation hold, but it identifies data that doesn't have to be retained. And so that data that you can target for deletion, really in a defensible manner, compliant with all regulations, would really help an organization move forward. So once you know where data is, who owns it, and whether it's subject to preservation and or collection, and once you have a standardized process, really what you'll start to see is your legal hold activities will accelerate. You'll issue holds faster. You'll get faster responses, right? You'll be able to track all of those responses, compile them all, and then you can begin preserving in a much more rapid sort of forward movement.
Thanks, Adam. So, as Adam had noted, steps such as identification do not stop, at the far left of the EDRM model, and it happens along the way as new information is discovered and gathered. Another example, that I think we should go over is through the legal hold process. So I think it's important to have a well-defined legal hold process, and software is not the process. The process should be defined before the software is even considered. So it's important that you understand how your organization works before looking at new software. For example, a software company is going to have a lot different needs than a retail or a manufacturing company. Software company is going to have employees with access to computers and can respond via computer to legal hold notices. The population is generally a little more computer savvy. Retail and manufacturing, as we've seen with some of our clients, it's a mix. So some employees are going to have computers, others won't have access. So the question becomes, how do you manage this easily to ensure compliance? The other thing you want to think about is how you're going to go about suspending document retention policies. Again, understanding the organization and how the organization works is going to be critical. Legal hold and document retention policies don't merely extend to the resources on a network or in a data vault.
they can extend to other different types of places as well. And you'll need to understand this before working through suspending document retention policies. So things like paper, documents that are handwritten, notebooks, journals, things of that nature that are often at an employee's desk, won't register if you're looking across the network for it. Other things like stacks of laptops that are being put aside to be reimaged, C drives, USB drives, home computers, and even things like cloud-type storage areas, so FTP sites, Google, Dropbox, etc. So if you're solely relying on a hold-in-place type of solution, you're not going to meet your organization obligations through those types of retention policies. So notification and confirmation of legal obligations are going to be key here. Finally, interviewing key custodians. With a large legal hold, multiple small legal holds, or a combination of both, it's going to be, again, crucial to identify the non-network or hidden resources, be it paper or electronic. Speed is going to be critical, as well as follow-up. Automation of the defined process and tracking of the process are also going to be something you're going to want to keep an eye on. So after this is all taken into account, you're going to then need to think about something like early data assessment, which I think Brian has a few words to speak on this.
Yeah, well, when we talk about early data assessment, I mean, we're really talking about two things here. We've got proactively assessing your data and reactively doing so. Though it's much less expensive and roughly, unfortunately, less than 5% of all cases address it proactively, I'll sequentially go ahead and start there. You know, the corporations want to quickly address three basic things always. What's my legal exposure? What's my cost going to be? And what's really the overall scope of this thing? You know, how many people and cost and resources do I need to allocate to it? You know, when you're doing it proactively, ahead of time, the data can be searched constantly, even in an automated manner, to address, you know, the more common as well as the general corporate concerns related to things such as employee misconduct, insider trading, compliance to regulatory matters, concerns about antitrust regulations, data leaks, fraud, the list goes on and on. Monitoring and better understanding these risks and reacting to them earlier with a proactive solution actually saves time, money, and obviously headaches. This will lead to then the next step. After you've done your analysis, you lead to the collection. You know, I'll talk a little bit before that about kind of again, the early data assessment in more of a reactive way, because again, that's probably 95% of the way all cases are done. But they're trying to achieve the same thing. What's my legal exposure? What's my cost? And what's the scope? You know, so when this is done in reactively, data is actually collected either forensically or simply gathered through coordination between the IT and the GC and maybe the outside counsel. When they use the gathering method, I use that term loosely because the term collection is supposed to mean forensic collection in general, but again, the vast majority of all cases, the data is just gathered or collected in a largely undefensible way. But it's common that these search parameters defined by the counsel do not match the technology being used by IT. Let me give you an example. Let's say if it's very common that the outside counsel will use Boolean operators for searching, such as stemming, proximity, or wildcards, and these are not supported in their syntax, or just it's supported entirely within the local tool that's being used. Let's say a real common local internal tool within a corporation is just Windows search. So if those keywords are what they're going to go and use in a defensible situation, and it's not even operating the way it's thought it was operating, obviously you have a defensibility concern, but this is very, very common. This is just one area of concern about collection. But after the collection or gathering is done, processing the data is the next step. Here we take the metadata. And metadata is, for those that don't know, it's just the file parameters such as date modified, author, date sent, etc. And the text are extracted from the data. The image files, such as the Adobe PDFs, for instance, are also OCR, because what we're trying to do is get all the text out so I can search across it. And that's the whole objective there. But once the data is processed, culling for date range, file type, or content with keywords, as I mentioned, or content grouping can be performed. Words of wisdom here, though, on that topic of date filtering. Again, a very common way to cull data, amongst others. You know, all cases are clearly defined to have date range of importance, though date filtering should really only be used for emails, not loose files. Why? Well, loose files are notorious for having their dates unintentionally altered. This happens through PC reformatting, data transfer, saving to different locations, etc. Some file types are pretty resilient, such as a lot of Microsoft Office file types are pretty resilient to having those things changed. Others are not, text files, etc. So you really, just as a rule of thumb, do not want to cull loose files. But again, this is a thing that's just not known. It's not done. People do it all the time, and in the end, you've got a data set that you're going to court with, or you're going to the next step in the process that you just don't really have what you think you have or what you really want a court to have. And that, of course, the next step in the process, which is what this is all about, which is review.
Right. So, and Brian and Joe and Mike and everyone, I think we all know what happens during review. I mean, this is nothing new, and the interesting thing is how review is being conducted, and I would argue when review is being conducted is shifting, and it's shifting rapidly. The sort of advent of technology-assisted review, priority, concept clustering, things like that are really shifting how review is conducted. But let's for a second go back to the RAND report, right? So if over 70% of the cost of discovery is review, then truly I think the process for how we get there, how we get from identification through ECA, through collection, preservation, and into review, that process for how we get there should take on even greater importance. And so while TAR, clustering, analytics, right, that's all very important. Those are very important strategies for streamlining review. I would say that let's start to think about review not as, again, a pocket in this linear process, but let's start to think about review when we're thinking about data identification, when we're thinking about information governance, because it's even more important if review is that costly to have strategic data identification and culling strategies in place very early on, right, to reduce the amount that you'll need to review in the first place. This sort of proactive review that may come before collection is huge, because it may alert you to a matter that you didn't even know was in play, right? So strong information governance policies from the outset will help an organization reduce their review spend. It's just a fact. So then once you do get to review, because you're confident in your process that you use to hone your data set, right? You use technology accelerators, process accelerators, a really unified and transparent process to identify data that may be subject to a particular litigation hold, or even prior to that matter arising. You know what data you have and where, and you got rid of data that may have put your organization at risk because it was legally defensible to do so. Once you get to review and you're confident in your process, you can use those process improvements and technology accelerators, right, the clustering, the analytics, the assisted review, to really help you with the mechanics of the review. But I would argue in this phase, maximizing communication and collaboration are incredibly important between stakeholders, and not just the e-discovery consultant who may be processing your data, between them and the outside counsel who's now reviewing the data. Collaboration and communication, still needs to happen between all parties, including general counsel office and the organization's IT department, right? And leverage technology as best you can to make that review process transparent and accessible. Accessibility is really becoming an important factor in determining how organizations move forward with their e-discovery consultants and with their outside counsel, because they really want to align the business and the legal and the IT stakeholders, in this endeavor.
Yeah, and I think all of what Adam's mentioned speaks to the fact that with multiple moving pieces of these types, collaborating inside and outside and working with maybe a trusted partner, a solid project plan is needed to help guide the entire process. The details of the plan might change, but the themes will not. So there's big pieces that will always be the same. But think about this. There's lots of stakeholders that are going to be involved in every one of these types of projects. Think of some of the case teams that you've worked on if you're an attorney or paralegal out there. Now add to the case teams vendors. Now thinking about adding partners such as a service provider. Now think about adding opposing counsel, and of course don't forget to add the client. So there's a lot of different communication points that need to be touched upon as you're going through this. And with this much going on, best intentions among different parties can sometimes lead to duplication of efforts if communication is not smooth between everybody. And at worst, you can end up engaging in some missteps. So because of this, I think it's really important for the project manager to have a clear plan on how to proceed to avoid these problems and make sure that all the resources are being utilized appropriately. So as part of that project plan, you're going to make sure that you've got a strong and clear communication plan that's going to include all these parties. And of course, reporting to all of these people along the way is going to be key. Best practices around project management of this type are going to include, again, coordinating work efforts and different activities via communication plan. The plan can be software-based, or it can be a reminder via a calendar and regular reporting outwardly to all interested parties. Of course, I think it's going to be much better to have this automated to keep a lot of these menial tasks that a project manager would have to do daily in accordance with all the other types of activities they're going to have to prioritize, and put that with the computer. So it's not another task that the project manager is going to need to process. One example is when I was a project manager, I'd spend a lot of my day working with a number of different clients, and because of this, everybody wants to know the status of their project. So I would say that probably a good 25% of my day went towards reporting status of the job, where things were, how things were proceeding, to the various stakeholders that were on each one of those projects. So as you can see, a lot of that time that could be better spent maybe managing the project or attending to some of the other activities that need a lot of attention. It may be overlooked as you're spending a lot of this time going through and reporting. Coordination of the workflow to ensure that people are not stepping all over one another is also key. Additionally, with coordination comes the benefit of collaboration, as Adam was mentioning. A workflow-driven process will allow everyone to work in synchronization as the project moves forward. The workflow can include not only the internal resources, but also the external folks. So exports of information to different organizations, such as maybe a Terrace or a Lightspeed, to help them control the process. An example of this is that these workflows can also help protect you in the long run. I remember I was working as a paralegal at one point where I had worked on a matter and it had closed out, and I'd then taken on several other new matters that demanded a lot of my attention. And as those became more intense and heated up over time, I had an attorney come back and ask me about a case that I had worked on 6 months ago. And that project, to try to find out what I had done on a specific part of that case that's since closed, and now there was additional issues coming out of that, took quite a while to go through and dig through emails, maybe some network shares and other types of areas to try to figure out and reconstruct what had happened. If you've got a system where you've got a workflow-driven process that's going to document a lot of this information in one place, this will allow you to easily refer back to that and get that information very quickly. So as part of that project plan, documentation is going to be critical, especially, again, as some of those matters can be very contentious. And Mike?
Hey, thanks, Joe. So we just broke down the e-discovery process into the classic stages based on the EDRM. But I think with advancements in technology, it has presented corporate legal teams with chances to really streamline and redefine their e-discovery processes beyond the traditional EDRM model. Brian, can you walk us through the streamlined new technology-assisted e-discovery process model?
Sure. Well, we have the typical EDRM that most of us have seen many times over. But what we're seeing is that technology accelerators, as was just mentioned, are going to change this. One of the most obvious shifts we see in the market is an in-place assessment of the data. And what I mean, well, since all the data comes from the corporate location initially, having the data reside in a more e-discovery-centric infrastructure not only makes sense, It almost seems silly not to do it, but it's substantially faster, more efficient, dramatically cheaper method to identify or categorize or review when needed. Here in the new commonplace graphic, we can see the life cycle of data actually shifts dramatically. And why is that? Well, we don't need to parse things out in those typical buckets we saw in the EDRM. We can take all of these 4 items here, stacked top to bottom, and put them together in one in-place assessment. Because that's where it is in the first place. Why don't I just identify it, do some early data assessment, do all of this stuff together in the corporate space? It's identified typically through interviews and at times with some internal searching and a myriad of other means, but if it's collected and gathered and then later on normalized during processing for review analysis, the problems arise when these efficiencies and costs inherent in this widely used model. With the advent of the software, one of them is Xterra. It's just phenomenal as it allows for all the needed tasks of identification, forensic sound collection, it's important to say that, processing, analysis, and of course this first pass review to be done in this corporate environment. Efficiencies and inefficiencies and high costs can be dramatically changed. Why? I mean, the stuff's there, it makes sense. Further, you have a partnership with an e-discovery company that jointly addresses these issues with the corporate client under a managed ESI umbrella. The costs over legal spend can realistically be reduced. We've got, with certain clients where we've reduced it as much as 52% annually. I mean, that's an unbelievably large figure. I mean, to achieve these benefits, there are a few key features and methods that you really want to take a look at and look for. And those address things, we'll pass it off here to, I guess, Adam. He'll talk a little bit about how these methods and these more advanced technology methods can be used in a defensible manner.
Adam, are you there? Well, I'll just take over for Adam here.
Hi there. I apologize for the technical snafu. I was saying that I work with clients at the corporate level all the time who feel that they're blind, right, to a lot of what's going on with their own data, both internally at their company, but also once data goes over the fence, right, to a vendor or service provider, and then outside counsel. So, the key is bringing transparency and control back to the organization. I think sort of the in-place ECA is a perfect example of that, because the organization can work with their outside provider or their internal IT infrastructure and really start to assess the data and have control and transparency into the data before it goes over the fence, right, if indeed it even has to at that point. So, I would say leverage technology to accumulate data about your data, right? Run those data points through a pre-built set of scenarios. You can calculate cost, right? You can figure out very early on, hey, what's this going to cost us to move forward with this matter, right? How can we reduce costs a little bit here and there, or maybe we can't reduce costs and let's just go forward, but we know that we have a much better idea of what it's going to cost us going forward. So you can test search terms, right? So the main point here is bring the tools and the data closer to both the legal teams, but also the business and IT teams, right? Early, often reporting, from counsel's office to, business division leaders and things like that. That can only help, sort of have everyone in the organization buy into what you're trying to do. And really that, by definition, is process improvement.
Yeah, and in regards to a need for a universal dashboard for a lot of the management controls, I think this is also critical, because along with the workflows that you can start using amongst clients and additional people that are working on the different projects, you're going to allow people that might not be directly involved with the product, but can be a stakeholder, a chance to go ahead and view the data. So a lot of the less savvy, maybe people that are involved in the e-discovery project can quickly get a lot of information very quickly through a single project portal without having to have the knowledge to run reports or generate queries and so forth. So I think that's going to be pretty critical to be able to view a lot of the workflows and the status of the project. The other nice thing with this is that you're allowed to collaborate with a lot of the outside experts. So if you're working with a, again, a Terrace or a Lightspeed, you're able to get information reported in real time back into the application and know at all times where the status of the project is. Especially because with a system that you want to go ahead and use, you want to make sure that you've got multiple roles for each case so that as different parties are logging in, so be it the e-discovery vendor, outside counsel, or the corporation, each one's going to have a need for a different set of tools and a view into a universal dashboard. So along with this, you're allowed to, again, communicate and collaborate with it, and it'll all be in a centralized location.
And I mean, when we're doing this, keep in mind, to have a universal dashboard, what you really want to have is something that's going to be able to read into all the various different software and data points throughout the entire corporation. So you want to have something that's going to integrate. It's going to integrate the e-discovery process with their IT landscape. I mean, that has to be a given, because you can't just have a wonderful software that sits, and by the way, that various individuals within the corporation have to still be able to function and use, 5, 10 other softwares. They can do that, but it's very important not to, rock the apple cart. You'll be able to bring in a software that truly integrates, talk to these various different softwares, that the corporate doesn't have to go in and completely trash whatever they have and start from scratch. It doesn't have to happen. There's softwares out there that actually can integrate with the existing softwares. Everything from data mapping with their IT to the HR systems for billing, et cetera. All that stuff can be done, and it's out there. And that's definitely what you want to be able to do, because to be able to keep this thing defensible, you don't want many, many different softwares functioning and different flows for each of those softwares. Joe talked, as you will, about collaboration, but integration is the key, and the last piece would be, of course, automation. The more you can make a process automated, the more you can basically just say, well, that's exactly what we did. We went from step A to B to C in an automated fashion. And, of course, to make a process or a changed process for a corporate successful, automation is going to be key, because you don't have to go through a process of training or bringing on new people or personnel or all sorts of different things you're going to have a lot of kickback on that. But again, those are some of the key things that you want to deal with in the final piece, which is, again, integration and automation.
Thanks, Brian. Before closing this webcast today, I would like to ask each one of our panelists, Brian, Adam, and Joe, for just 1 to 2 key takeaways to give our audience. Panelists, when these webcast attendees walk away from this webcast, what are the most important things that they should remember? Adam, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks. I mean, so I think probably the most important thing is for people to start thinking about data as a strategic asset, right? Whether it's good for your case or bad for your case. You want to gather information about your company's information and share it early and often, with in-house legal, outside counsel, your process consultant, your e-discovery consultant, your attorneys, your business units, your IT personnel. And again, the ways to do it, as we've touched on, automation is huge, collaboration, but really bringing the tools to the source of the data is important, and that's how you can really leverage your data to become an asset for your company.
And Brian?
Well, I'd probably say, you want to find a data expert. I mean, I always think about it like a mechanic. I might know how to do certain things with my car, but I don't want to have to do it. I don't have time to do it. It's not really what I do. But find that guy, hold on to him. Make sure he's a forward-thinking. He's connecting this IT and GC thing with true automation. Inexpensive and stable integration, and an easy, usable, collaborative tools. All those things put together would be my takeaway.
And finally, Joe?
I'd have to agree with Brian. I mean, the one thing that you want to walk away with is that you're not alone. I think between key software solutions and a lot of the experts in the service provider world, there's plenty of resources out there to help you find your way through the complexity. I'd also add on that, again, you want to make sure that you're monitoring and tracking a lot of the different key steps that you're doing along the way. This applies to both the legal hold process as well as the project itself, because without that careful monitoring, coordination and tracking, a lawsuit can easily become derailed because of internal mistakes, leaving the legal teams defending the process rather than the merits of the case.
Well, thank you, Adam, Brian, and Joe. It looks like we have some time for a little Q&A. We got couple questions from our audience. I'll pose this to the panel. The first one, Joe, I'll direct this one to you. You didn't talk about legal hold options. Which is better, hosting a legal hold system or installing it behind the firewall? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, again, earlier I spoke to the fact that you really want to know what's going to be the best solution for the company that you're going to be working with. So again, knowing how the company works is going to be critical. So if you're trying to maybe offload a lot of those IT tasks that you're currently overtaxed IT departments has taken on, you want to make sure that you can have a solution that can go into the cloud. Conversely, if you're more security conscientious and you want to take on those types of tasks because you feel that you can staff for it and it's important that it's behind the firewall, you can do that as well. But I think most importantly the walkaway is to think about the fact that you want to make sure that if you're going to consider the both, you might want to think about a solution that can actually do both. So if you want to maybe start in the cloud to get it moving quickly and have that ease of use, and then maybe hard cut over to behind the firewall, solution can do that as well.
Thanks, Joe. That's some really good advice there. Adam, we end up getting a couple questions talking about just information governance and the proactive approach. So I'm just going to sort of sum it up together. You talked a lot about information governance and knowing how much data you have, where its value is, and what risk it poses. Most corporations, however, don't really have the money or are not really willing to spend the money to index, search wide data amounts without a compelling need to do so. So how realistic is this proactive approach that you're really talking about?
Well, in my opinion, and what I'm seeing out there is it's very realistic, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it though and say that it's not without its challenges, because it most certainly is. But most good IT personnel, right? They're constantly doing a current state analysis of their IT infrastructure. So they're analyzing what systems are up, how well they're running, how close to capacity they are. Maybe thinking about future storage needs, right? So, if you're in a legal space, maybe you're in-house in legal, or you kind of bridge the two spaces, in-house legal and in-house IT, and walk the floor, get with someone from your IT, and walk the floor, and whether that's through a data map, or you're physically walking around and talking about the sort of current state, of an organization's IT infrastructure. Do that, gather information, right, and then start to talk about how you would like to see the future state of your company, and start to bring those things up with that information technology professional. You may find that it's easier to get there than you would have thought, right, and most likely a lot of the things that you bring up and that we brought up here about information governance, chances are your IT professional is already thinking about those things and wanting to get there, but they need buy-in, right? IT so often operates in a silo, and they would love nothing more than sort of to connect into council office, perhaps, right? A C-level office, or someone with that kind of sort of broad, compelling vision of the company, and who, if you get buy-in on an approach like this, will help lead the company in that direction. So, that really is probably the greatest challenge. I think technologically, it's not as great a challenge as really aligning all of the stakeholders. But once you do that, there's technology there that can do this, and I would say, sort of eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? Maybe start somewhere. Start with email. Start even with, with offsite storage somewhere, and do a proof of concept. Show the different stakeholders that this can work, right? It worked on this small set of data. There's a scalable system. Let's scale it up to this next larger set of data, and let's just keep working through it until, hey, you know what? We've eaten the whole elephant. We know, pretty much in total where our organization's data is and what it is.
Well, thanks, Adam. And along that same lines, that proactive approach, this also will be our last question today. Brian, what do you think is the most single impactful thing a corporation can do to address their e-discovery strategy in the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, I mean, if they're going to do it right away and they want to pull the trigger quickly, I'd probably say Xtero is a SaaS solution with a qualified vendor, us, Lightspeed, Terrace, or anybody who can do it and do it right. I mean, it's not as big of a leap, and it's kind of sort of piggybacking what Adam just said. It's not that big of a leap like people think. If you do have a software that integrates with what they have, if they do a SaaS solution, they don't need to add people or hardware. So it's really, really simple for them to pull the trigger and not have to worry about next year's budget or something like that. The money and the finances, when you break it down really detailed on doing everything the way we've been talking throughout this broadcast, you're talking about millions of dollars saved. So it makes sense. It's very clear. And you know, companies such as Xtero or Terrace can break that down for any corporation and show how it can make sense. We're not talking about some fancy ROI. It's very, very clear. It's almost alarmingly clear, and why people aren't doing it is just, you know, old habits, I guess.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian, and thank you to all of our panelists, Joe, Adam, and Brian, for participating in this webcast. And I'll toss it back over to Andrew.
All right, thanks, Mike. The Xtero Fusion platform is uniquely designed to address the many e-discovery complexities that our speakers addressed today. Xtero's innovative suite of e-discovery applications built on the Fusion platform unifies all phases of e-discovery, from identification, legal hold, and early case assessment to collection, analysis, review, and production. Xtero also recognizes the important role that expert services play in helping organizations establish consistent processes and fully utilize e-discovery technology. Our speakers today hail from Lightspeed and Terrace, two of the most highly regarded e-discovery service providers in the country. Xtero has partnered with both companies to help clients overcome the many difficulties related to e-discovery and data management projects. Working together, Xtero, Terrace, and Lightspeed provide clients with an unmatched, unified array of applications and services required for defensibly and efficiently managing all e-discovery activities. By combining expert e-discovery services with Fusion's open and flexible architecture, clients can locate, collect, process, analyze, review, and produce documents more efficiently while dramatically reducing costs and the likelihood of errors or delays. You can learn more about these partnerships and the Xtero Fusion platform by visiting the link on the screen. That's xtero.com/collaborative-ediscovery-webcast. There you will also be able to download a copy of today's presentation slides. A full replay of this webcast will be made available shortly in Xtero's online resource library. That's at xtero.com/resources. Thanks again to our speakers, Adam Wells, Brian Phillip, Joe Ockery, and to our moderator, Mike Hamilton. Xtero's user conference, Infusion 12, is coming up September 12th through the 14th, just outside of Portland, Oregon. Infusion 12 features 2 days of educational sessions, panel discussions, hands-on workshops, and professional training. Some of the foremost experts in e-discovery are leading this year's educational presentations, including George Sosha, co-founder of EDRM, and Greg Buckles, analyst for the EDJ Group. For more information, please visit xtero.com/infusion. That's INfusion. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.